guys, and welcome to the Learning Gecko. Today we'll be discussing if the leopard gecko is the pet reptile for you. So, you may be wondering, why are you making this video? And why is it your first video? Well, this is Cooper, my first pet reptile. He is a leopard gecko, and I love him a lot because he's pretty cool to me. And I want to spread the interest of reptiles to others. Because reptiles are often overlooked when you search for a new non-human family member. Because dogs and cats overshadow most other exotic pets. And I want to inform you about leopard geckos and why you should consider them as an option for your next pet. In the wild, leopard geckos are naturally found in the dry, rocky grasslands of South Asian Afghanistan, Pakistan, northwest India, and some parts of Iran. These areas they inhabit are deserts. Something all knowledgeable keepers of leopard geckos are going to let you know is they don't live on sand. The definition of desert is arid land with usually sparse vegetation, and the definition of arid is of land or climate having little or no rain, too dry or barren to support vegetation. The point here that I'm presenting is sand isn't what makes a desert a desert. The climate is. So they naturally reside on a substrate that is mostly clay with a little bit of loose material, but they don't reside on just straight sand. And this means your pet should not be placed on it. And why is this such a big topic that people want to enforce? Impaction. He wants to come out, so I'll let him out. Impaction is something that many geckos will die to, like all the time. Because when they eat your sand, or whatever's in the substrate, it will get stuck in their digestive tract and clog themselves up. They won't be able to poop, they won't be able to gain nutrients, and they just die. And it's just not great because it's so easily prevented, yet many people can't just research. So the next thing we're going to move on to is lights. Leopard geckos have extremely sensitive eyes, and you may be thinking, how's that even possible? They live in a desert. They have the bright sun on them all day long. Well, they don't. They live in burrows all day, and they're crepuscular, meaning they only come out at dawn and dusk. Meaning they're not nocturnal. That doesn't mean they can see in the dark. So they come out when the sun's rising and the sun's setting, so they can see, but they don't have that bright sun in their eyes, and it's where their food comes out at. And when they are here, when they're out on the sand at this time, the sand is still warm due to its it's a low specific heat, causes it to warm up pretty fast. And that means it cools off pretty fast, so they gotta get on there quick. Because during the daytime in these deserts, the sand gets incredibly hot, and they can't really survive on the sand that hot, so that's why they stay in their burrows. Their diet will consist of only insects, so things like crickets, mealworms, superworms, waxworms, butterworms, hornworms, they like worms, locusts, but hornworms and waxworms, and I think butterworms too, are strictly treats and used otherwise provide no nutritional value to your gecko, and they can become addicted. So no matter what, do not feed hornworms, waxworms, butterworms to a non-healthy gecko, someone who's not eating or not at a healthy weight, because then when it comes to eating, they'll get addicted to that and not want to eat anything else. But a tip to helping with this is you can get some waxworm guts on their lips so they start licking and stuff some food in their mouth. So leopard geckos have no real form of defense in the wild. As you can kind of tell, their claws aren't sharp enough, and they can bite, but they don't do that because it doesn't hurt. So their way of staying alive is dropping these fat tails. And this is not a best case scenario for the lizard while being chased, as their tail stores plenty of fat, like a camel's hump that is converted into water when they don't have much hydration. So they can regrow it, but it is generally something they don't want to do because it takes a bit to grow back. Other species of lizards can drop their tails as well, but not all of them can grow them back like the leopard gecko. And but this isn't the worst case scenario for your gecko, because they can grow it back, and in the wild they live to see the other day because the tails will thrash and stuff and distract the predators. Now we're going to move on to husbandry, or their care. Leopard geckos will carry a tank with a gallonage of 20 at the least for an adult, and the tank should be a 20-gallon long, meaning it's 20 gallons this way, not upwards. And 20 gallons, you should not have two geckos together. You should not have two geckos with each other no matter what, unless you're breeding them. And once they breed, once they copulate, get them away from each other. The male will breed the female to death, and it's not a good idea. There's a 3-head minimum for each gecko in a tank. I don't support cohabiting, meaning putting two geckos together. Not even female to female. Two males, they'll definitely kill each other. But if you're cohabiting, make sure you have lots of space and 3 hides for each gecko. And the 3 hides are, one hide will be on top of the heat source or below it, depending how you provide it, so they can go to feel secure while they digest their food, because they need heat on their stomachs so the food will digest properly. The other side will be on the side that doesn't have a heat source, so this way they can thermoregulate and make sure that they're not overheating. And the third hide is called a moist hide, or a humid hide. This hide will have things like moss, damp paper towels, wet dirt, other stuff that will keep it much more humid in there than anywhere else in the tank, so that when they have to shed, they can go in there and easily take off their shed without having to, without you having to clean it off. They need readily available water, a luxury to their wild counterparts, and some people make the argument that you want to keep it as close to the wild as possible, so why are you providing them water? That's not natural and stuff. Well, for one, this is just disputed by the fact we're keeping them in glass tanks. That's literally the farthest away from the wild as possible, so ignore that, and the sand part kind of goes with that too, but then again, sand is not in their habitat. A small cup or water bottle cap filled with calcium powder you can buy from your pet store nearby is essential, because they need their bones to stay nice and strong. They can, they can tell when they need calcium. They'll regulate it themselves, and that's why sand can be so bad. They fill them with vitamins and stuff, so they sense the vitamins, eat sand. They're literally eating sand because they think they need it to survive, and they just die because they ate so much. Another thing is their heat source cannot be a heat bulb. An exception to this is a deep heat protector or a ceramic heat emitter. These ones can be pretty good for heating up the ground below, but heat bulbs are generally a bad idea because they provide a certain type of light, and they don't need that. Heat mats are really good for beginners because they just heat up the ground right there and they lay on it, and it's really good. Just make sure with any of these you get a thermometer or a thermostat to go with it to control the temperature so it doesn't burn them, because heat mats can get up to like 115 degrees unregulated, and that can cause burns and scars to your reptile. And put tile beneath the CHE if you use one, ceramic heat emitter, so the bulb will heat up the tile for your gecko to lay on. Another thing to do is, when it comes to lights, the only lights you generally need are UVB lights to help with preventing MTV. And make sure none of your lights are colored, because colored lights will disrupt sleeping patterns, and that's just not a good thing. So now we're going to be talking about why this gecko is good for beginners. Well, leopard geckos are the best pet for anyone who is either new to reptiles, new to pets, or even people who are experienced will come back and get more reptiles. They require minimal care compared to any other pet, and their tank's minimum size is one of the smallest out of any other reptiles. Any smaller would be dart frogs and stuff, and those aren't exactly beginner reptiles because you'd have to start a bioactive terrarium. Initial startup costs may seem expensive, but compared to other animals, this isn't any different. Leopard geckos come cheap as can be, while other reptiles and mammals will hit your budget hard. Once you set up your new pet, costs are very low. You basically would just be paying for food now and then. If you aren't so interested in holding and being physical with a gecko, it won't even make a difference because they're fine being held as much as they are just sitting in their tank all day lounging around. Their fat tail makes them resilient to tough times when they don't feel like eating or when disaster strikes. And the thing about reptiles in general is reptiles can be pretty bad eaters. They will want to just go off food whenever just cause, or during the winter months they'll go off food, and females will go off food when they're about to lay eggs. So fat tails on these things will last them a while when they don't want to eat food. In captivity, they live 20 years as an average if you keep them in proper care. So prepare to kind of stay with your gecko for a while. Some people may not like this as it feels like too much of a commitment, but if you ever feel like you can't handle your reptile again, there are places that will take in old reptiles, people who will take them in for you and keep them, and they don't develop emotional attachments to anything, so they'll generally just not care. They might get stressed out if they're moved to a new place, but they'll be fine. Important things to know is leopard gecko substrate can be a very controversial topic. So I'll cover the stuff to put on the bottom of the tank briefly so I don't start any arguments or go too deeply, because generally it's on opinion and experience. Non-loose substrate is a safe yet often less natural appearance. So this option also most preferable to beginners because you don't have to worry about sifting through the dirt for their poop, and it's a good way to monitor your new gecko's health. Some choices to this include non-adhesive shelf liner, ceramic tile with texture, paper towel, reptile carpet, and there are also less conventional choices I haven't yet heard of. Tile is generally my choice that I would choose for beginners. It comes relatively cheap. You can get it cut at Lowe's. Holds heat very well. On the cold side will stay fairly cool. It's very clean, and I just think it can look really nice. Non-loose substrate can be trickier to deal with, but I prefer it for its much more natural look and the enrichment your gecko will get out of digging and finding new ways to just hang out. There are so many choices, and the creativity they allow is absurd. Choices include topsoil, eco-earth, Leolife, and many others. Leolife is found in the UK, and I'm sure you can find someone to import it for you, but if you live out of the UK, it may not be worth the hassle. But if you do, I strongly recommend it. I wish I could get it here in the US. It's amazing. It replicates the natural habitat almost perfectly. Topsoil can be found in the gardening section of your grocery store, but make sure it doesn't have any fertilizers in it. And if you're switching to topsoil or setting up a tank before the gecko comes, make sure to give it a few days to dry out, because when I got it, it stayed like 60-70% humid in his tank the whole time, and it freaked me out, but it just has to have time to dry out. And remember, just make sure it has no fertilizers or slow releasing, fast releasing, because these can harm your gecko. Never bring anything you find outside into contact with your gecko. Bugs found outside may have ingested pesticides or have parasites. Hornworms, as an example, like to feast on tomatoes, but tomato leaves are toxic to leopard geckos, and when these hornworms ingest it, it may lead to a fatal mistake. Also, if you're planning on introducing anything from the outside to your gecko, I'm hoping you're using a bioactive setup, which I may be doing a video on later. But it's a very complicated setup for beginners, but I strongly recommend it if you're getting into reptiles. When in the same room as your gecko, make sure not to light any candles, spray any cans or aerosols, or use any essential oils. Being organic won't make a difference, because Leopard geckos' bodies are not made to ingest or inhale any plant matter, as they are strictly insectivores. So their body won't recognize it, and it will just do lots of damage to your gecko. Do not house multiple geckos in the same tank. I have covered this, and it's an accident waiting to happen. They lack the capacity in the brains to feel empathetic or feel love for other creatures. So two geckos will just compete for resources and eventually fight. And you may have done what I advised earlier with cohabiting, which is to have a huge tank and lots of resources for them. But they're not going to understand that they won't have to compete, and they're just going to look at each other as competitors for resources. People may say, oh, look at our geckos cuddling. Laying on each other is not a form of cuddling or empathy. It is a form of showing dominance over the other gecko, and eventually geckos will all fight each other. And it's just never right to assume it will end in a good time, because one day geckos may lose tails or even their own lives. And geckos are strictly solitary creatures that should only be together under breeding circumstances. And as I said, don't keep them in breeder pair together, because the male will breed them to death. So that was my video on why leopard geckos may be the pet reptile for you. I hope you liked it, and that I inspired you to investigate more on your own into getting your new scaly friend. Whether it's a leopard gecko, a snake, or some other type of gecko. If you want to see more videos where I read from a script and tell you about animals, don't forget to subscribe. And leave a like if you thought this video was informative. I hope to all talk to you later. Peace. Goober says bye.